Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming to another episode with Elections Daily of Blast from the Past, a series where we interview former members of Congress about their tenure. I'm Armin Thomas, and with me I have Harrison Lavelle. And today we have with us former Democratic Congressman from Texas, Bill Sarpalius. He was a former state senator from 1981 to 1989, after which he represented the 13th district in the Panhandle from 1989 to 1995. So, Congressman Sarpalius, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you. It's good to
Uh,
be with you.
Thank you. So, Harrison, you want to start right off?
Yeah, sure. So thank you again for coming on. My first question for you is what pushed you to run for Congress back in 1988? And how did your 8 year service in the Texas State Senate prepare you for the House?
Well, in Texas, we only have 31 senators. So a state senator actually represents more people than a congressman does. And the congressional seat was open. The member that had it before me, Bo Bolter, decided to run for the U.S. Senate. So it was an open seat, and I decided to pursue it. My tenure in the Texas Senate was extremely helpful, and especially in preparing me to represent the people of 13th District in Washington. There was a big difference as far as politics. There was not much partisan politics in Texas at that time. We actually had the Democrats were in power, but many Republicans chaired committees. So there was a lot more cooperation in getting things done. In Washington, when I came here, I found complete difference. And in partisan politics has even gotten worse over the years. But what drove me here, what drove me to get into politics originally was, I don't know if you knew about my background, but I was homeless as a young boy and was sent to a place called Cal Farley's Boys Ranch. When I went there, I was 13 years old in the 5th grade and couldn't read. But my father left when I was 10, and my mother was an alcoholic and could not find help to deal with that disease. She was also suicidal. And I dealt with that even living at Boys Ranch and after I left Boys Ranch and her struggles. When she finally committed suicide, was when I decided to get into politics. And I ran for the Texas Senate, started my race with $25, zero name ID, running as a Democrat in a Republican district. But and I was determined to try to do something in dealing with that problem. And I was successful in doing that over 10 years or 8 years. We created a new state agency that set up alcohol and drug treatment centers across the nation. Then when I came to Washington, I didn't know what I was going to work on then. My background is agriculture. I was a vocational agricultural teacher. And I found myself thrown right in the middle of the breakup of the Soviet Union. And that was my calling there.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, so Congressman Sarpalius, I'd like to ask my first question. So, I mean, you already mentioned, even back in the 1980s, when Texas was a lot bluer than it is now, the panhandle of Texas was already one of the more Republican leaning areas of the state. So, you really didn't have a lot of resources or name recognition. So, how exactly did you run a winning campaign in this type of a district that, to my knowledge, didn't support a Democrat for president either since Lyndon Johnson in 1964 or Harry Truman in 1948?
Well, first of all, the reason I ran as a Democrat was because the Democrats were in power. And I had assumed that if I was with the party that was in power, I would be in a position to where I might could accomplish more for my constituents and for the causes that I was working towards, making some improvements and changes in. But I just outworked it. It was an open, I mean, when I ran for the Senate, there were 7 candidates running at the time, but I worked it very hard. I went door to door. I I just worked it the old fashioned way. I got a lot of college students involved in helping me, and I wrote my own brochure and did my own TV spot. I had raised enough money for one TV spot, but most of the people in the Panhandle were aware of Boys Ranch, and there's no doubt that my background of growing up there was beneficial to me. And so when I ran that first TV spot, what was funny was people were calling into the TV stations asking when they were going to run it again. So, I was able to obtain some more funds and eventually won that election.
Yeah, that's a very interesting tale of your first campaign. And it kind of plays into my second question, because after you got into Congress, obviously, based on your heritage, one of your big causes in Congress was focusing on Lithuanian independence. So my question is, could you tell us about your personal relationship with Lithuania and how that influenced your work in Congress, not only with your push for Lithuanian independence, but also your push for a strengthened relationship between the United States and Lithuania?
Well, let me back up a little bit about the congressional race, because when I ran for Congress in the primary, some drug dealers hired a hitman and had my jaw broken. A guy came up from a crowd. I never saw his face. He hit me, knocked me down, kicked me, and busted my jaw here and here. So I ran in the primary with my mouth wired shut. And it was a hard election, but I worked hard at it, and I had a good reputation as a state senator. But when I came into Washington, I knew nothing about my heritage or my background. My dad left when I was 10, so all I knew was that my name was Lithuanian. So I was in office maybe about 3 or 4 days, and this tall man came into my office about 8 o'clock at night, who had come from Lithuania to the Capitol. He didn't know anybody, but he saw the roster of members and saw my name, and it stood out, and he came to my office to introduce himself. And he was a music teacher in Vilnius. And he knew about my uncle, who was a famous composer of music in Lithuania, which I knew none of this. And he knew more about my family roots than I did. So we became acquainted. And then he asked me what I asked him, what are you doing here in the Capitol? And is there anything I could do to help you? And he told me that he was head of this new political party that was called the Sąjūdis Party. And his goal was to get him on the ballot against the Communist Party. And he said, if we could just get on the ballot, he thought that the Sąjūdis Party would gain enough delegates, enough members to win, that Lithuania would break away from the Soviet Union. And he said if Lithuania would do it, then he thought Estonia and Latvia would follow, and then Georgia and Ukraine and Romania, and it would lead to the collapse of the Soviet Empire. Well, if he had been in my office in 1989 and heard that, you would have thought he was crazy. But I began trying to help him with his cause. And being of Lithuanian ancestry, that kind of helped me. And of course, there were other members. I got, Dick Durbin was from Lithuania, or his mother was from Lithuania. Martin Frost his mother was from Lithuania. So I began to learn that there was a large delegation of members of Congress that were interested in that cause. Well, President Bush selected me along with 3 other congressmen to go to Vilnius to witness those elections representing the United States. And when we got into Berlin, the Soviets took our passports away. In that delegation was myself, I had 2 Democrats, myself and Dick Durbin, and then Chris Cox, and my mind's gone blank on the other one. I'll think of it in a minute. But anyway, they took our visas and passports away and would not allow us into the country. So we held a press conference in the hotel lobby and explaining how they have denied these 4 members of Congress representing the United States from observing these elections. And that hit the front paper of every paper around the world. And the next day, the Soviets let us in for 16 hours. And we came into Vilnius, and I wished you would have seen what I saw. The Zionist Party had gained a majority. They were breaking away from the Soviet Union. My friend, Dr. Landsbergis, the music teacher, was elected their first president. And thousands of people in the streets. It was so amazing to witness that. And we had gone to a small town. We got on a school bus and were talking to the new leaders of that government. And they didn't know how to set up a government. And Chris Cox had brought copies of our Bill of Rights and our Constitution that had been printed in Lithuanian language. And we gave it to him. And in the back of that school bus, we discussed how to help set up their government. And so when we got this small town, there was a Catholic cardinal who had been in exile for over 45 years. And we came back to Vilnius, and we went in this old Catholic cathedral that had been converted into a museum for the Soviet Union. And thousands of people were outside. They were all crying. And we went into that old church, and the Catholic cardinal walked in there, and they had Mass for the first time in over 55 years. And to witness that and to see that. And they had built scaffolding. I remember they built scaffolding up on the back of the church, and they were scraping off this green paint from the ceilings, and you could see where the whole ceiling had been painted, this beautiful artwork. And it was an experience, the experience of my lifetime, to witness that. And of course, the rest of it is history. We got involved with helping Estonia and Latvia as well. And the Soviets brought their tanks from Afghanistan to Vilnius and surrounded the parliament building with these tanks. And the Lithuanians had built a small wall, made a concrete wall about this thick around the parliament building. And there were about 1,000 people in there at a time, and they would rotate out. And this was in the winter. So they had bonfires everywhere, and they were trying to stay warm. And surrounding that parliament building were these Soviet tanks. And I'll never forget when several members from Congress came into Lithuania when they were under siege. And my friend Landsbergis came up to me and he hugged me and he said, we're going to make it. We're going to do this. And he had a 16-year-old boy take me up to the top of the parliament building. And when he walked up the stairs, on each level, you saw these sandbags with these young kids holding hunting rifles. And we went up to the very top, and the roof was flat. And they had driven nails through these 2x4s, and they had them covered over that entire roof. And this boy was telling me, he says, see, we have all these nails here so no helicopters can land on top of this building. And we looked over the edge and you could see all the people around there. It's kind of like, I felt like I was in the Alamo. These people gathered around these bonfires and people with hunting rifles. And I said, I don't know if you understand what you're up against here. I said, you don't understand, the Soviets could blow this building up with a blink of the eye. And I'll never forget what he told me. He said, oh no, Mr. Congressman, you don't understand. He said, today we are free people, and we will live as free people or we will die as free people. And that determination that that 16-year-old boy felt was everywhere. It was present everywhere. And that's when I began to truly realize that communism was going to crumble. And it did. Estonia and Latvia gained their independence, and we saw the world change. And I experienced this as a freshman member of Congress. I learned a lot in my first term. But then the challenge was you had all these new governments, all these new countries, and you had to help establish a government within those countries that were not a dictatorship, but that were a democracy. And then on top of that, all their economies were collapsed. So how can we help those countries establish themselves economically? So when I served, it was a great time. I mean, we saw the world change.
Thank you. That was a really, really interesting
Yeah,
account.
that
I
was a
think
great
honestly,
story.
it's the most interesting story we've heard on any of these interviews, and we've done quite a few of them at this point. So thank you really very much for that.
Yeah, thank you. That was great to listen to.
Well, the country of Lithuania, as years went by, they gave me their highest honor by making me their Grand Duke. And about a year and a half ago, I published a book that's called The Grand Duke from Boys Ranch. And that's a story behind it.
Well, I'll have to check it out. So, Congressman Sarpolis, I would like to ask you my second question. So, in 1994, ultimately, you did not successfully win re-election against now retired Congressman Mac Thornberry, but you did post the best performance and probably the only time Democrats have gotten above 40% of the vote in that district, in an extremely rural district that's now the reddest in the country. So just knowing that 1994 was going to be a red year, what led you to run for reelection? And based on your experience, canvassing 50 different counties all across rural Texas, how can Democrats do better with rural organizing today, in your opinion?
Well, I have always kind of supported limited terms. And my plan in the back of my mind that I was going to serve maybe for 8, maybe even 10 years, and that was it. So, a lot of people were encouraging me to change parties. And if I would have switched parties, I could have been there as long as I wanted. But I had to stick with the people who brought me there, the people who supported my campaign. And I had a lot of Republicans that were supporting me. It was not just Democrats. I just happened to be caught up in a sweep at a bad time. Anybody could have beat me that year. It just so happened that Mac Thornberry happened to be on the ballot. But I do think what Democrats need to do, and here again, the Democratic Party's changed a lot since I served.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
Yeah, and it's, I can't align myself totally with the Democratic Party, and I really can't align myself totally with the Republican Party. Yesterday, we saw our Capitol raided by a mob of people who I would consider the extreme right. And then the Democrats are just as far. We have some that are at the extreme left. But I really believe that the majority of the American people are in the middle. They're more moderates. They want to operate our budget conservatively. They don't believe in giving away money to people who are too lazy to work. They have a strong faith and belief in the direction that this country is going. But both parties have split, in my opinion. And that's unhealthy. I just hope and pray that this next administration will help help heal this country, that will help bring us back together. And but they're gonna have their issues because there are people in the Democratic Party who want to go way too far to the left, in my opinion.
All right, thank you,
Yeah.
Congressman.
So my final question for you, you already talked, it kind of initially in your fascinating explanation of Lithuania, you answered a big portion of the question. So I'll just shorten it a bit. So the question is, what first got you interested in public speaking, which you've been doing quite a lot of since you left Congress, and how has it influenced your work since you've left the House?
Well, people that knew my background, that opened up some doors for public speaking. There's a lot of people who like to hear a motivational story. I went from digging food out of trash cans to being a member of the United States Congress, and that doesn't happen everywhere. And people are curious of how did you do that? Well, and that's my story. That's what's in the book. And of course, when I published the book, I had gotten lots of engagements. It hit the bestseller list on Amazon, and it's done very well. Then COVID hit. And like any other business, all my engagements were all canceled, and we were all at home. But I hope that when we get through this, I'll have some more opportunities to. I especially enjoy talking to young people and people who have some doubts about the direction this country is going, and show them that it's still the land of opportunity, that a person that has nothing can become something, and that you can dream any dream. And in this country, you can make your dreams come true. And we live in a wonderful place. It's just heartbreaking to see people who try to tear it down. I've always believed you can't get anywhere by tearing somebody else down. You have to build yourself up, and focus on what you can do to make the next day a better day.
Thank you.
Yeah, so Congressman Sarpalius, I'll ask my final question. Texas's 13th district and just the Panhandle, in general, is one of the most rural, agricultural heavy seats in the country. And Mac Thornberry was a good advocate for the agricultural interest in his district. But what do you think of? I was going to ask you, what do you think of now Congressman Ronnie Jackson's focus on culture war issues over agricultural ones? Because all of the farm interest endorsed his opponents, Josh Weingartner, in the primary. And how does that bode for, the changing nature of rural Texas, and potentially also the power of the agricultural lobby?
Well, I was supporting Ronnie Jackson. I think he will be a good congressman. He grew up in Lavelle, Texas. I know that district like the palm of my hand. It is large. It is a hard district to cover. When I served, I ran a mobile office. It was so big. And you have to think in square miles, it was bigger than every state in the nation in square miles, than 7 states. So it was a brutal district to represent. But I think Ronnie Jackson, he's very open-minded. His background has been in the military, and we have an air base there at Shepherd Air Force Base. But he also enjoys agriculture, and I think he's going to make a real effort. He wants to get on the Ag Committee, and I think he's going to make a real effort. He's surrounding himself with good people, and I think he's going to do a good job. I'm going to do everything I can to try to help him be a more effective member in any way that he wants to use me.
Do you think that Jackson will end up, does he seem like he wants to do this for a long time in Congress? Does he have some big goals ahead of him? I'm just curious, because I too like Ronnie Jackson. I think he's a very good guy, but I'm just curious what he thinks now that he's just begun his tenure in Congress just a couple days ago.
Well, he claimed that he wanted to serve 10 years, but who knows? Who knows? 10 years from now,
Yeah,
he may be chairman of a committee where he could
it's
do a lot
true.
of good. You don't know. But he's very dedicated. I think his I think he's going to be a good member. I think he's going to represent the entire district. One of my faults with Mac Thornberry was he very seldom went back to that district. And a lot of the rural towns never saw him. But I think Ronnie will be a guy that will go to those rural towns and that will make himself accessible to the people.
Thank you,
Thank
Congressman.
you. Harrison, you want to take us out?
Yeah, sure. So thank you everybody for watching another interview, this time with the former congressman from Texas 13th Congressional District, Mr. Bill Sarpalius. And we were very, very happy to have him on today for another episode of Blast from the Past. Thank you.
Thank you.